My husband's girlfriend wore my diamond bracelet to our dinner. I responded with calculated calm that changed everything. "Beautiful evening, isn't it?" she said with a smirk, the tennis bracelet glinting under the restaurant chandelier as she deliberately reached for the wine. Instead of causing a scene, I simply opened my purse and removed an envelope. "The trust fund has a morality clause," I said softly, "and I have documentation of every single transaction between you two." Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. I stood in front of the full-length mirror, examining my reflection with practiced scrutiny. The emerald green dress hugged my curves elegantly, a deliberate choice for tonight's dinner at Bellamy's. At 42, I still turned heads, not that the head I once cared about turning seemed to notice anymore. My husband, Vincent, once looked at me like I was the center of his universe. Now his gaze drifted past me more often than not. "You look stunning." "Mrs. Crawford," said Elise, our housekeeper of 15 years, appearing in the doorway with my freshly pressed wool coat. "Thank you," I replied, fastening teardrop emerald earrings that Vincent had given me on our 10th anniversary. My neck remained bare, waiting for the diamond tennis bracelet I'd discovered in Vincent's study drawer 3 weeks ago. The bracelet had been a surprise find. I'd been searching for our property tax documents when I came across the distinctive blue velvet box from Rothman & Co., the city's most exclusive jeweler. Curiosity had gotten the better of me. Inside lay a breathtaking diamond tennis bracelet, the stones catching light even in the dim study. My heart had lifted momentarily. Our 25th anniversary was approaching, and perhaps Vincent had remembered after all. That warm feeling evaporated when I found the receipt tucked beneath the box. It was dated just 2 weeks earlier, but my birthday had passed months ago, and our anniversary was still 4 months away. The curious timing niggled at me, joining a growing list of inconsistencies I'd been noticing but pushing aside. My hands trembled slightly as I applied my signature, rose-colored lipstick. Not from nervousness, but from a cold, calculated anger that had been building for months. I studied my fingers, reminding myself that tonight required absolute composure. Control had become my closest companion lately. I could pinpoint the exact moment everything changed. It was a Tuesday in November, rain lashing against the windows of our brownstone as I reviewed the quarterly statements for the Crawford Family Trust. As trustee and financial advisor to the considerable fortune Vincent's grandfather had established, I'd been tracking unusual withdrawals for nearly a year, small enough to not raise immediate alarms, but substantial when viewed collectively. A $50,000 transfer to an unfamiliar account stood out among the recent transactions. No investment purpose. Noted, no corresponding receipt in our records. When I casually mentioned it over dinner that evening, Vincent's explanation came too quickly. "End-of-year bonuses for the staff at the foundation," he'd said, barely looking up from his plate. I'd nodded, smile fixed firmly in place. The next day, I called our foundation director myself, inquiring about the staff appreciation initiatives. Her confusion confirmed my growing suspicions. That evening, I accessed Vincent's email while he showered before his late meeting at the office. His password was embarrassingly simple: Vincent C1975, unchanged in years. The man managed a $300 million family trust, but couldn't be bothered with basic security. The confirmation came in a thread between Vincent and a woman named Natalia Reeves. Their exchanges were intimate, filled with inside jokes and plans for weekends when I would be visiting my sister in Boston. Natalia, 34, stylish and ambitious according to her LinkedIn profile, worked at the very art gallery where Vincent had been spending increasing amounts of time as a patron of emerging artists. A car horn outside pulled me back to the present. Vincent was already downstairs, likely checking his watch impatiently. I took one final look in the mirror, picked up my small clutch containing the envelope with its damning evidence, and squared my shoulders. Game time, I whispered to my reflection. Sophia, we'll be late for our reservation, Vincent called up the stairs. And you know how Bellamy's gets about their tables. The irony wasn't lost on me. Vincent Crawford, chronically late to family, functions and our daughter's college parents' weekends, suddenly concerned about punctuality for this particular dinner. But tonight was special. He'd reserved the semi-private alcove at Bellamy's, the restaurant where we'd had our first date 26 years ago. What Vincent didn't know was that I'd called Bellamy's myself yesterday. Mr. Crawford requested privacy, but I'm hoping to make a slight adjustment, I'd told Marcel, the maitre d' who had known us since the restaurant opened. It's a surprise. The 25-year relationship, and generous tip, had secured his cooperation without questions. The drive downtown was filled with Vincent's uncharacteristic chatter. He was animated, almost giddy, praising my appearance with an enthusiasm that once would have warmed my heart. Now I recognized it as performance, the same charm he deployed for potential donors at foundation events. You really outdid yourself. With this reservation, I said, gazing out at the city lights as our driver navigated the evening traffic. Bellamy's on a Thursday night. Quite the achievement. Only the best for us, Vincent replied, reaching for my hand. I let him take it, noticing how his thumb absently caressed my bare wrist. I have something special for you, something worthy of the remarkable woman you are. The phrase made my stomach turn. The remarkable woman he'd been systematically deceiving, for at least 18 months according to my records. The remarkable woman whose financial acumen had doubled the Crawford Trust during the last market downturn, while Vincent collected accolades for his stewardship. We arrived at Bellamy's, its facade warmly lit against the early spring evening. Marcel greeted us personally, leading us to our alcove, now subtly reconfigured to remain visible from the center of the restaurant. Vincent frowned slightly at the change but recovered quickly. I thought we'd have the curtains drawn, he murmured to Marcel. My apologies, Mr. Crawford. Private dining restrictions have changed. Fire code regulations, Marcel responded smoothly. But I've ensured your favorite table. Our regular server, Antonio, approached with champagne. Mr. Crawford and the lovely Mrs. Crawford. Always a pleasure to see you both. We clinked glasses, and Vincent launched into reminiscing about our early days, how we'd met at Columbia, how I'd believed in him, when he was just a history major with dreams of restoring his family's philanthropic legacy. It was a narrative he'd refined over the years, one that conveniently omitted how my financial strategies had rescued the nearly depleted trust his father had mismanaged. I was nodding along, playing my part, when I felt the air in the room shift. Vincent's eyes moved past me, widening slightly, a micro-expression of panic quickly replaced by forced nonchalance. I didn't need to turn around to know she had arrived. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. All right, let's get back to it. The woman approaching our table was striking in a way that demanded attention. Natalia Reeves moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly the effect she had on people. Her black dress was expertly tailored, probably Italian, and cost more than most people's monthly rent. But it wasn't the dress that caught my attention. It was the diamond tennis bracelet catching the light on her slender wrist. My bracelet. The one from the blue velvet box in Vincent's study drawer. "Vincent, darling," she said, her voice carrying, just enough to ensure nearby tables could hear. "I thought I might find you here." I watched the color drain slightly from my husband's face as he attempted to maintain his composure. 25 years of marriage had made me fluent in the micro-expressions of Vincent Crawford. The slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible clench of his jaw. He was panicking. "Natalia," he said, his voice slightly higher than normal. "What a coincidence. You remember my wife, Sophia?" "Of course," she replied, turning her attention to me with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Beautiful evening, isn't it?" As she spoke, She deliberately reached for Vincent's wine glass, taking a sip while maintaining eye contact. With me. The bracelet slid down her arm slightly, diamonds glinting under the restaurant chandelier. It was a power move, designed to provoke an emotional reaction. "Lovely to see you again, Natalia," I replied calmly, though we had only met twice, at gallery functions where Vincent had been careful to keep our interactions brief. "That bracelet is stunning. Rothman and Coer, isn't it? Their craftsmanship is unmistakable." Her smile faltered slightly. This wasn't the reaction she'd anticipated. Vincent cleared his throat. "Natalia was just helping me select some new pieces. For the Foundation's offices," he said quickly. "Weren't you, Natalia?" "Among other things," she replied with a small smirk, her fingers lingering on Vincent's sleeve. I took a slow sip of my champagne, my mind calculating moves and counter-moves like the chess matches my father had taught me as a child. I had anticipated something like this happening, perhaps not so brazen, but the confrontation had always been inevitable. The question was whether Vincent had orchestrated this meeting or if Natalia had gone rogue, determined to force a resolution. "Please, join us," I said, gesturing to the empty chair at our table. "Since you're here, we might as well make it a proper dinner." Vincent's eyes widened slightly. Natalia looked momentarily thrown off balance but recovered quickly, sliding into the chair with practiced grace. "How thoughtful of you, Sophia. I wouldn't want to intrude on your— What is this exactly? Anniversary dinner?" "Just a Thursday," I replied smoothly, though Vincent did mention he had something special planned. Perhaps you know more about it than I do. Antonio, our server, approached the table, professional enough to hide any reaction to the developing situation. "Would Madam like a menu?" he asked Natalia. "She won't be staying long," Vincent interjected before Natalia could respond. "Actually," I said, "Ms. Reeves will be dining with us. Please bring another glass of the Krug, Antonio." As Antonio departed, an uncomfortable silence descended on the table. I could see Vincent's mind racing, trying to determine how to regain control of the situation. Natalia seemed to be reassessing me, perhaps realizing for the first time that I wasn't the oblivious, passive wife she had imagined. "You have excellent taste in jewelry, Natalia," I continued, nodding toward the bracelet. "Though I've always found it best to ensure gifts are freely given rather than borrowed." "Vincent gave this to me," she replied, lifting her wrist slightly. "2 weeks ago, he said it complimented my eyes." I turned to Vincent, whose face had become a carefully controlled mask. "How interesting. The very bracelet I saw in your study drawer. I assumed it was an anniversary gift, given the timing." Vincent's voice was tight when he finally spoke. "Sophia, this isn't the place." "I disagree," I interrupted gently. "I think this is exactly the place. Public enough to ensure civility, private enough for honesty. Don't you think we've had enough secrets, Vincent?" Natalia's confidence was visibly wavering now. She glanced between us, the dynamics shifting in ways she hadn't anticipated. "Vincent told me you were preoccupied with the trust," she said, attempting to reclaim ground. "Too busy for him. All work and no attention." I smiled, genuinely amused by the predictability of the excuse. "Did he mention that the work was managing the very fortune that funds his lifestyle? The one that pays for bracelets and gallery? Purchases and I assume that charming pied-à-terre on Westlake Avenue?" Her surprise confirmed my investigator's findings. The apartment had been the final piece of evidence, a luxury condo purchased through a shell company Vincent had created, funded with trust money. Antonio returned with champagne for Natalia, seamlessly integrating her into our dinner as if this were a planned gathering of old friends. Other diners were beginning to notice the tension at our table, conversations quieting as attention shifted subtly in our direction. With deliberate calmness, I opened my clutch and removed a sealed envelope, placing it on the table between us. Vincent's eyes fixed on it immediately, wariness replacing his earlier panic. The Crawford Family Trust has very specific provisions, I said, my voice low but clear. I've always found the morality clause particularly interesting. Section 7.3, if I recall correctly. Vincent's face paled. As the appointed trustee, I knew every line of the trust documents. Vincent, despite being the public face of the Crawford fortune, had always left the boring details to me. My grandfather's outdated notions, Vincent said dismissively, attempting to regain his footing. Hardly relevant in modern times. On the contrary, I replied, tapping the envelope. Your grandfather was quite forward-thinking. The clause doesn't just cover marital fidelity, though that's certainly included. It specifically addresses misuse of trust funds for personal indiscretions. I turned to Natalia, whose champagne remained untouched. Did Vincent ever mention that using trust assets to fund extramarital affairs could result in his removal as beneficiary, or that any assets purchased with misappropriated funds would be subject to recovery? The bracelet on her wrist suddenly seemed heavier. She instinctively covered it with her other hand. This is absurd, Vincent said, his voice rising slightly, before he caught himself. You're making wild accusations based on nothing. The trust has a morality clause, I repeated, sliding the envelope toward him. And I have documentation of every single transaction between you two, from the bracelet to the apartment to the gallery purchases that never actually arrived at the foundation. All of it, Vincent. Marcel approached our table, concern evident, beneath his professional demeanor. Is everything satisfactory, Mr. and Mrs. Crawford? Actually, Marcel, I said before Vincent could answer, I believe we'll need to adjust our party. Mr. Crawford may be leaving early. Natalia stood abruptly. I should go, she said, no longer meeting my eyes. The polished confidence had cracked, completely, revealing the uncertainty beneath. Before you do, I said, reaching into my clutch again. I extracted a small business card and offered it to her. My private investigator documented everything, including Vincent's pattern with previous gallery assistants. You're not the first, Natalia. Jessica Winters in 2018. Eliza Montel before that. Vincent has a type, ambitious, talented women who don't realize they're replaceable in his narrative. The color drained from her face as the full implications of my words sank in. She looked at Vincent, who couldn't quite meet her gaze. Keep the bracelet, I added quietly. Consider it severance for services rendered. Though I'd recommend having it appraised, Vincent has been known to substitute lab-grown diamonds when he thinks no one will notice the difference. Natalia's departure left a vacuum of silence at our table. Several nearby diners quickly averted, their gazes when I looked around, their sudden interest in their meals almost comical. Vincent sat rigid, his knuckles white around his untouched wineglass. Was that really necessary? He finally asked, voice low and controlled. To humiliate me in public? I took a measured sip of my champagne, allowing the moment to stretch before answering. Was it necessary to give my bracelet to your girlfriend? To bring her to our restaurant? To lie to my face for 18 months? It wasn't 18, he began, then stopped himself, realizing the admission implicit in his defense. 17. Months and 23 days if we're being precise, I corrected him, beginning with the gallery opening last September, though your pattern of behavior extends further back, as I mentioned to Natalia. Vincent's eyes darted around the restaurant, assessing who might be witnessing his public unraveling. Image had always been paramount to him, the distinguished philanthropist, the benevolent steward of the Crawford legacy, the devoted husband.
Ja. Rożonom kärlär, särskilt esfolit kudex sikliket i kabinetsta tisid, lingning kvarföver, sikken hidi.
Laugh, the sound genuine if tinged with bitterness. After 25 years, you still don't understand me at all, do you? This isn't a negotiation for more assets. This is a reckoning. The envelope still lay between us, untouched. Vincent glanced at it nervously. "What's in there?" he finally asked. "Evidence." I traced the edge of the envelope with my fingertip. Bank statements showing withdrawals from the trust for the apartment on Westlake. Credit card receipts for jewelry, weekend getaways. That trip to Belize you claimed was foundation business. Photographs, text messages, emails, all meticulously documented by Mr. Harrington. Who? The private investigator I hired 3 months ago. Former FBI, highly recommended. Very thorough. Vincent's face flushed with anger. You had me followed? Invaded my privacy? That's prudent, I interjected calmly. Given that you were systematically misappropriating funds from a trust I'm legally responsible for overseeing. Did you think I wouldn't notice, Vincent? I'm a financial advisor. Numbers are my specialty. I thought back to the exact moment I'd decided to hire Julian Harrington. It had been after discovering a series of transfers to an LLC I didn't recognize, Westlake Properties. The amounts weren't extraordinary in the context of the Crawford fortune, but the pattern had triggered my professional instincts. 3 days of careful investigation had connected the LLC to the purchase of a luxury condominium, a property Vincent had never mentioned. The decision to hire Harrington hadn't been made in anger or jealousy. It had been a calculated move to protect myself and the trust I was responsible for. Emotions had no place in financial oversight. The morality clause is archaic, Vincent said dismissively, attempting to regain his footing. No judge would uphold it in a modern court. Perhaps not, I conceded, though your grandfather's attorneys were quite thorough, but I'm not particularly concerned with that aspect. Then what do you want? Frustration edged his voice. Accountability. I met his gaze steadily. The trust documentation clearly prohibits using assets for personal indiscretions or activities that would bring disrepute to the Crawford name. Section A specifically mentions misappropriation of funds for extramarital affairs. Vincent's expression darkened. I built the foundation's reputation. I'm the one who turned it into something meaningful after my father nearly ran it into the ground. We built it, I corrected him. Or have you forgotten that it was my investment strategy that restored the corpus of the trust after the 2008 crash? My connections that brought in the Harrington Endowment and the Wilcox Partnership? Antonio approached with our appetizers, setting them down with professional grace despite the obvious tension. Chef has prepared the scallops with a black truffle reduction this evening, he explained, his eyes carefully avoiding the envelope between us. Can I bring you anything else? We're fine, thank you, Antonio, I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. As he withdrew, Vincent leaned forward again. What happens now? You file for divorce, cite the morality clause, and try to claim the entire trust? I shook my head slowly. That would be short-sighted. The foundation does important work. Work I believe in. I have no interest in dismantling it or causing a public scandal that would undermine its mission. Confusion flickered across Vincent's face. He had expected rage, tears, vindictive demands, not this calm, strategic approach. For the first time that evening, I saw genuine fear in his eyes as he realized he couldn't predict or control what was coming. 3 months ago, I continued, I had a meeting with Judge Eleanor Blackwood. You remember her, I'm sure. Head of the Trust's Oversight Committee. Vincent's face paled. Judge Blackwood had been his grandfather's closest friend and advisor, a formidable woman who had never quite warmed to Vincent despite his charm offensive. I presented her with preliminary evidence of financial irregularities, I explained. Nothing specific about the affair, just the concerning pattern of withdrawals and questionable expenditures. She suggested we conduct a thorough internal audit before determining next steps. You went behind my back to Blackwood? The betrayal in his voice was almost comical given the circumstances. I went to her as a fiduciary with concerns about trust administration, I corrected, which is my legal obligation as co-trustee. My mind drifted back to that meeting in Eleanor Blackwood's wood-paneled chambers. At 83, she remained sharp as ever, her steel-gray hair cut in the same practical bob she'd worn for decades. She had listened intently as I outlined my concerns, her expression giving nothing away. Vincent has always had his grandfather's charm, she had commented when I finished. Unfortunately, he also inherited his father's weakness for short-term gratification. Gerald would be disappointed but not surprised. She had tapped her pen against her legal pad thoughtfully. What do you want to do, Sophia? The morality clause gives you significant leverage, but invoking it would create a public spectacle. I want to protect the foundation, I had replied, and I want Vincent to face consequences for his actions without destroying everything we've built. Judge Blackwood had nodded slowly. Then perhaps it's time for a restructuring of leadership. In the restaurant, Vincent was trying to regain his composure. Whatever you think you found, there are explanations. Business expenses can look irregular without context. The apartment is for visiting artists and foundation guests. Please don't insult my intelligence, I said quietly. The security footage Mr. Harrington obtained shows only you and Natalia entering that apartment, usually on Tuesday afternoons, and Friday evenings, coincidentally when you told me you were at board meetings or donor dinners. Vincent's jaw tightened. You've made your point, Sophia. Tell me what you want, and let's end this unpleasant scene. I laid my hand on top of the envelope, feeling the weight of its contents. Not just the physical evidence, but the power it represented. For years, I had allowed Vincent to be the public face of our shared work, content to remain in the background managing the details he found beneath him. I had accepted his gradual erasure of my contributions, his careful reshaping of the narrative until the Crawford Foundation had become synonymous with Vincent Crawford alone. That ended tonight. The Oversight Committee is meeting tomorrow morning, I said, my voice steady. Judge Blackwood has called for a vote on new leadership structure based on the audit findings. I'll be presenting a comprehensive report, including evidence of fund misappropriation. Vincent's eyes widened as he grasped the implications. You're trying to push me out. I'm ensuring accountability, I corrected. The committee will vote on a proposal to appoint me as executive director, with you transitioning to a ceremonial role as chairman emeritus. You'll maintain your public association with the foundation, but will no longer have signatory authority over trust assets. That's you. Can't, Vincent sputtered, his carefully maintained facade crumbling completely. I can, and I have, I replied calmly. Judge Blackwood has already indicated her support, as have 4 other committee members. The vote is a formality at this point. Vincent's face flushed with anger. This is about control. You've always resented being in my shadow, playing second fiddle to... This is about accountability, I interrupted, my voice finally taking on an edge. And the shadow was one you created, Vincent. I built the financial structure that saved the trust after your father's mismanagement. I developed the investment strategy that doubled our endowment. I managed the details you considered beneath your attention while you collected the accolades. I leaned forward slightly. Tomorrow, the committee will see the full picture, not just of your financial indiscretions, but of who has truly been stewarding the Crawford legacy all these years. Vincent's face had transformed completely. Gone was the charming philanthropist, replaced by a man confronting the collapse of his carefully constructed world. He reached for his water with a hand that trembled slightly, buying time as he processed the magnitude of what was happening. The board will never accept this, he finally said, though his voice lacked conviction. I've built relationships with these people for decades. They trust me. They trust the Crawford name and what it represents, I corrected. And they respect results. The audit shows clearly who has been generating those results and who has been taking credit for them. Around us, the restaurant continued its evening rhythm, but I noticed several furtive glances from nearby tables. Charleston's social circles were intimately connected. By morning, whispers of tonight's confrontation would be circulating among the very board members Vincent was counting on. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" Vincent said bitterly. "Orchestrated the perfect public humiliation." "I've been thorough," I acknowledged. "Just as I've always been with the Foundation's finances. The details you considered beneath your concern." I thought back to the countless evenings I'd spent poring over investment portfolios while Vincent attended galas and fundraisers, collecting praise for philanthropic initiatives I had structured and funded. The irony was that I had never minded the division of labor. His social charm complemented my analytical mind. What I had minded was the gradual erasure of my contributions, the subtle reshaping of the narrative until the Crawford Foundation. Success became synonymous with Vincent alone. "What about us?" Vincent asked, his voice dropping to a near whisper. 25 years, Sophia. Does that count for nothing?" The question momentarily caught me off guard. Despite everything, some small part of me had hoped for genuine remorse, an acknowledgement of what we had once meant to each other. Instead, he was negotiating, still trying to leverage emotional connection to maintain his position. "I valued those 25 years," I replied carefully. "Enough to create a solution that preserves your dignity and the Foundation's mission, despite your actions." Vincent's expression hardened. "By reducing me to a figurehead? A ceremonial role while you take control of everything?" "By creating consequences proportionate to your actions," I corrected. "You'll maintain your public association with the Foundation. Your legacy remains intact, but you've demonstrated you can't be trusted with fiduciary responsibility." A glint of his old calculation returned to Vincent's eyes. "And what about our marriage? Is this your way of asking for a divorce?" "That depends entirely on you," I replied evenly, "though I think we've established that fidelity isn't your priority." I traced the rim of my champagne flute, considering my next words carefully. The truth was, I hadn't decided about our marriage. The practical side of me recognized the advantages of maintaining our public partnership while establishing clear boundaries. The emotional side, the part I had carefully compartmentalized during months of investigation and planning, wasn't ready to make that determination. "I want you to understand something, Vincent," I continued after a moment. "This isn't a spontaneous reaction. I've had months to consider every angle, every consequence. The restructuring proposal preserves what matters, the Foundation's mission and stability." "How generous of you," he said, sarcasm edging his voice. "More generous than you deserve," I replied calmly. "The morality clause gives me grounds to remove you entirely. The documentation in this envelope could end your role completely and potentially trigger legal consequences for misappropriation of trust funds." Vincent's eyes darted to the envelope again, his expression calculating. I knew that look. He was assessing whether he could somehow intercept the evidence, destroy it before the morning meeting. "Don't," I said simply, reading his thoughts. "Mr. Harrington has provided copies to Judge Blackwood and my attorney. This is merely for your benefit, so you understand exactly what the committee will be reviewing tomorrow." Antonio approached. Again, his professional demeanor firmly in place despite the obvious tension at our table. "Would you like to proceed with the main course, or would you prefer a moment?" I glanced at Vincent, giving him the opportunity to salvage some dignity by continuing the dinner. His face remained tight with anger, but years of social conditioning won out. "We'll continue," he said stiffly. As Antonio withdrew to signal the kitchen, Vincent leaned forward, dropping his voice. "What does Harrington have exactly? What have you told the committee about personal matters?" There was fear beneath the question, concern about how much of his indiscretions would become public knowledge. Vincent's reputation had always been his most valued asset. "The committee is concerned with financial impropriety, not your bedroom behavior," I assured him. The audit focuses on unauthorized transfers, mischaracterized expenditures, and management of trust assets. Your relationship with Natalia is relevant only insofar as it connects to misappropriated funds. Relief flickered briefly across his face before suspicion returned. And you expect me to believe you're being this restrained, out of concern for the foundation? I built that foundation alongside you, I reminded him. Its mission matters. To me, providing arts education to underserved communities, funding emerging artists, preserving cultural heritage. Why would I want to damage that with unnecessary scandal? The main courses arrived, the chef's renowned sea bass for me and Vincent's usual dry-aged steak. The food looked exquisite, though I doubted either of us would taste it. You never wanted the spotlight, Vincent said after a few moments of tense silence. You always said you preferred working behind the scenes. I preferred the work to the recognition, I corrected. There's a difference. I never asked to be erased from the Foundation's story. I thought back to the Crawford Foundation's 10th anniversary gala, when Vincent had accepted a Community Impact Award with a speech that credited his vision and innovative approach, both of which had been entirely my creation. I had sat at our table, applauding politely while the program listed me simply as Mrs. Vincent Crawford, despite my role as the Foundation's chief financial strategist. The repositioning of the investment portfolio after the market downturn, I continued, cutting a piece of sea bass that I had no appetite for. The Cultural Heritage Preservation Initiative, the scholarship program for first-generation college, students, all my projects, Vincent, all attributed to you in press releases and annual reports. I never claimed, you never corrected, I interrupted. When the Charleston Business Journal profiled you as a financial visionary last year, did you mention that I was the one who restructured our entire investment approach? When you accepted the Philanthropy Innovation Award, did you acknowledge that the Community Arts Initiative was my proposal, designed and implemented entirely by me? Vincent had the grace to look uncomfortable. The foundation has always been a team effort, a team where one player takes all the credit, I noted. Until now. Around us, the restaurant continued its elegant ballet of fine dining, servers moving between tables with practiced precision, wine glasses being refilled, desserts presented with flourish. Our corner remained a jarringly discordant note in the harmonious scene, two people sitting across from each other at a beautifully appointed table, marriage and partnership unraveling between perfectly plated entrees. What happens after tomorrow's vote? Vincent finally asked, pushing his barely touched steak aside. Assuming the restructuring is approved, which it will be, you'll transition to Chairman Emeritus effective immediately. I'll assume executive directorship with full fiduciary authority. And the apartment, Natalia? The questions came reluctantly. The Westlake property will be sold, proceeds returned to the trust, I replied matter-of-factly. As for Natalia, that's between you and her, provided no additional trust funds are involved. Though I suspect tonight's revelation about your pattern with previous assistants may have cooled her enthusiasm for the relationship. Vincent flinched slightly at the precision of my knowledge. You've really had me investigated thoroughly, haven't you? As thoroughly as you deserved, I confirmed. Jessica Winters wasn't difficult to find. She's a gallery director in Savannah now. Quite willing to discuss your 2-year relationship and the subsequent gaslighting when you moved on to Eliza Montel. That was 4 years ago, I finished. For him. And Eliza lasted approximately 14 months before you found a new protege. Your pattern is remarkably consistent, Vincent. His face flushed with anger again. So this is revenge. For affairs you've apparently known about for years. This is consequence, I corrected. For systematic financial impropriety and professional misconduct. The affairs are simply the context for your misappropriation of foundation funds. I set down my fork, no longer maintaining the pretense of eating. I made a choice years ago to look the other way regarding your personal behavior. Perhaps that was a mistake. But when you began using trust assets I'm legally responsible for overseeing, you crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. Vincent stared at me for a long moment, reassessment in his gaze. I never thought you would fight back like this. You were always so accommodating. That was my mistake, I acknowledged, echoing his earlier phrasing. I allowed myself to become invisible in the narrative we built together. I convinced myself that the work mattered more than the recognition. I paused, meeting his eyes directly. But recognition does matter, Vincent. It shapes legacy, influence, and ultimately determines who has a voice in the future. You understood that instinctively. It's why you so carefully cultivated your public image as the visionary behind the Crawford Foundation while relegating me to the background. Something shifted in Vincent's expression. Not quite understanding, but perhaps the beginning of recognition that he had fundamentally misjudged me. He had mistaken my preference for substance over spectacle as lack of ambition, my willingness to share credit as unwillingness to claim it. I'll fight this, he said finally, though without conviction. The board has already seen the preliminary audit findings, I interjected gently, and 4 members have privately expressed their support for the restructuring. This isn't a battle you can win, Vincent. The question is whether you'll accept the transition with grace or force a more public accounting of your actions. Vincent's shoulders sagged slightly, the first genuine physical manifestation of defeat I'd seen from him. For a moment, I glimpsed the man beneath the carefully maintained facade, tired, cornered, and suddenly aware of the precariousness of his position. You've thought of everything, he said again, but without the earlier bitterness. This time, it sounded almost like reluctant admiration. That's always been my role, I replied. To think of the details, anticipate complications, create contingencies. You relied on that professionally while dismissing it personally. Marcel approached our table, sensing perhaps that our dinner was concluding prematurely. Is everything to your satisfaction, Mr. and Mrs. Crawford? The meal was excellent as always, Marcel, I replied with a composure that belied the conversation we'd been having. We'll take the check now. Of course, Mrs. Crawford. He signaled to Antonio, who promptly brought the leather folder containing the bill. Vincent reached for it automatically, a gesture so ingrained it transcended the current circumstances. I made no move to stop him, though we both knew the payment would come from the joint account I managed. As Vincent signed the receipt, I gathered my clutch and the envelope, rising from my seat with practiced grace. I've booked a suite at the Magnolia, I informed him. I think it's best if we have some space tonight before tomorrow's meeting. He looked up, momentarily startled. You're not coming home? Not tonight, I confirmed. My driver is waiting outside. The reality was I had moved essential items to the hotel 3 days earlier, anticipating that tonight's confrontation would necessitate separate accommodations. The suite at the Magnolia offered not just physical distance but symbolic demarcation, the beginning of a new chapter where I was no longer defined primarily as Mrs. Vincent Crawford. Vincent stood as well, social training asserting itself even now. And after tomorrow? After the vote? That depends on several factors, I replied carefully, including your decision about how to proceed. We walked through the restaurant in silence, conscious of the eyes following our progress. By morning, speculation would be rampant in our social circle, fueled by whatever observers had gleaned from our tense dinner and Natalia's dramatic exit. Outside, Marcus stood by the town car, opening the door as I approached. Vincent hesitated on the sidewalk, suddenly looking lost in a way I had never seen before. Sophia, he said, his voice losing its practiced charm. Was any of it real? These past 25 years? The question caught me off guard. A moment of genuine vulnerability from a man who trafficked primarily in calculated charm. I paused, one hand on the car door, considering how to answer. Parts of it were, I said finally. In the beginning, most of it was. We built something meaningful together, Vincent, both our marriage and the foundation. That doesn't simply disappear, even with betrayal. His face registered genuine pain for the first time that evening. I never meant to erase you from our work. You did it so gradually I barely noticed, I replied. A press release here, an interview there, until the narrative became fixed. Vincent Crawford, visionary philanthropist, and his supportive wife in the background. I thought back to our early years, the genuine partnership we had formed while rebuilding the struggling foundation. Vincent had always been the public face, but there had been time when he genuinely acknowledged my contributions, when we truly meant both of us. The foundation gala next month, Vincent said suddenly. Were you planning to announce the restructuring there? I shook my head. No dramatic public reveal, Vincent. That's your style, not mine. Once the board approves the changes tomorrow, we'll issue a simple press release about the evolution of leadership and my appointment as executive director. Your transition to chairman emeritus will be framed as a natural progression. Relief flickered across his face. Despite everything, some part of me still wanted to protect Vincent from public humiliation, not for his sake, but for the foundation's, and perhaps for the memory of what our partnership had once been. You should know, I added, that while the restructuring is non-negotiable, other aspects of our future remain undetermined. I haven't filed for divorce, nor have I made any decisions about our personal relationship moving forward. Hope, quickly, masked, flashed in his eyes. Even now Vincent was calculating odds, assessing whether the cultivated charm that had served him so well might yet salvage something from the wreckage of his deceptions. I appreciate that, he said carefully, and I hope we can discuss those aspects further once tomorrow's business is concluded. I nodded noncommittally before sliding into the waiting car. As Marcus closed the door, I caught a final glimpse of Vincent standing alone on the sidewalk, the polished confidence replaced by uncertainty. To the Magnolia, please, Marcus, I directed, settling back against the leather seat as relief washed over me. Months of investigation, planning, and controlled fury had culminated in tonight's confrontation. The execution had been nearly flawless. Natalia's unexpected appearance with the bracelet had been an unplanned but ultimately fortuitous development. As we pulled away from Bellamy's, I allowed myself the luxury of a deep breath. For the first time in months, the tightness in my chest began to ease. My phone chimed with a text message from Judge Blackwood. Meeting confirmed for 9 a.m., quorum assured. Call me if you need anything before then. Eleanor had been an unexpected ally throughout this process. At our first private meeting, after I had outlined my suspicions about Vincent's financial improprieties, she had studied me with shrewd assessment, before saying, Gerald always thought you were the backbone of that foundation. Said Vincent had the smile, but you had the substance. Looks like he was right. The Magnolia Hotel came into view, its historic facade elegantly lit against the night sky. I had chosen it deliberately, not Vincent's usual preference of sleek modern luxury, but a place with character and history, much like the foundation I was reclaiming. In my suite, I kicked off my heels and poured myself a glass of bourbon from the bar cart, another deliberate choice that was mine alone, not Vincent's preferred scotch. The tensions of the evening gradually began to unwind as I moved to the balcony overlooking Charleston's historic district. The city spread before me, lights twinkling against the darkness. Somewhere out there, Vincent was likely returning to our penthouse, facing its emptiness with the knowledge that tomorrow would bring the formal dismantling of the authority he had taken for granted. My phone buzzed again. This time, Elise, our housekeeper. Mr. Crawford has returned home. Asked where you keep the financial files. I said I didn't know. Was that right? I smiled slightly at the confirmation that Vincent was exactly as predictable as I had anticipated. Perfect, Elise. Thank you. The Foundation's financial documentation was secured in my private office at the First Maritime Bank, along with backup copies of everything Mr. Harrington had discovered. Vincent would find nothing at home but redacted copies and public reports, documents. He had signed over the years without reading the fine print. My next message was from Catherine, my personal attorney. Everything filed as discussed. Temporary financial controls in place pending board vote. Call in the morning before meeting. The pieces were all in position. Tomorrow's vote was essentially a formality. Eleanor had secured commitments from enough board members to ensure the Bureau restructuring would be approved. Vincent would be removed from financial authority while maintaining his public role, a compromise that protected the Foundation's reputation while establishing clear accountability. I sipped my bourbon, savoring its warmth and complexity. For 25 years, I had existed primarily as an extension of Vincent Crawford, the supportive wife, the silent partner, the woman behind the man. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new narrative, one where my contributions would no longer be footnotes in someone else's story. My thoughts turned to the diamond tennis bracelet that had sparked tonight's confrontation. There was poetic justice in the fact that Vincent's gift to Natalia had become the catalyst for his undoing. The bracelet I had discovered in his study drawer 3 weeks ago, the bracelet that should have been mine, had instead revealed the full extent of his betrayal. I wondered briefly what Natalia was doing now. The realization that she was merely the latest in a pattern probably stung worse than the public humiliation. No one likes to discover they're replaceable, especially by someone who had presented them as exceptional. The night before, I had carefully packed away photographs from our early years together, Vincent and me at our wedding, during the Foundation's opening, at our 10th anniversary celebration. I had been surprised by the conflicting emotions that surfaced as I studied those images. There had been genuine love there once, a true partnership that had gradually eroded until only the appearance remained. I finished my bourbon and prepared for bed, laying out the navy blue suit I would wear to tomorrow's board meeting. The choice was deliberate, professional, authoritative, but without ostentation. I wanted the board's focus on the evidence and my qualifications, not on my appearance. Morning arrived with clarity and purpose. I had slept better than I had in months, the relief of action finally taken after so much careful planning. As I dressed, my phone lit up with a message from Vincent. "Can we talk before the meeting?" I considered the request carefully. Part of me wanted to refuse, to maintain the advantage of separation until the vote was complete. But strategic thinking suggested that allowing Vincent to believe he might influence the outcome could prevent last-minute desperation moves. "Lobby of the Magnolia, 8:15, I replied. "We leave for the meeting together at 8:30. His response came immediately. "Thank you." When I descended to the lobby at precisely 8:15, Vincent was already waiting. He had chosen his most conservative suit, the one he wore for meetings with traditional banking partners, and his expression was carefully neutral. I noticed with mild satisfaction that he looked like he hadn't slept. "Thank you for seeing me," he said formally, as if we were business associates rather than husband and wife of 25 years. "Of course," I replied, maintaining the same professional distance as we moved to a quiet corner of the lobby. Vincent didn't waste time once we were seated. "I've been thinking about your proposal, the restructuring." "It's not a proposal, Vincent. It's happening. The vote this morning is procedural." He nodded, accepting this reality with surprising grace. "I understand that. And after reviewing everything last night, I can see why the board would support it." The admission caught me off guard. I had expected continued resistance, perhaps even threats or emotional manipulation. "What I want to discuss," he continued, "is how we present this transition. To the public, our donors, the arts community. Always image conscious, even in defeat. But he wasn't wrong about the importance of managing this narrative carefully. As I mentioned last night, the press release will frame this as a natural evolution of leadership, I assured him. Your role as chairman emeritus will emphasize your continued importance to the foundation while acknowledging my expanded responsibilities. Vincent nodded slowly. And us? Our marriage? The question hung between us, complex and weighted with 25 years of history, both the genuine partnership of our early years and the hollow performance it had become. That's a separate discussion, I replied carefully, and one that depends on your actions moving forward, not just your words today. He met my eyes directly for the first time that morning. I want to try, Sophia, to fix what I've broken, not just for appearance's sake. I studied him, looking for the calculation behind the sincerity. Vincent had always been skilled at presenting exactly what people wanted to see. But beneath the practiced contrition, I detected something unfamiliar, genuine uncertainty. For perhaps the first time in our marriage, Vincent Crawford didn't know what would happen next. We should go, I said, rising from my seat. The board is waiting. As we walked to the waiting car, I felt a curious lightness. Whether our marriage survived in some reconfigured form or ended with the same strategic precision I'd applied to the foundation restructuring, I had reclaimed something essential. My own narrative, my own power, my own voice. The diamond bracelet that had adorned Natalia's wrist last night was a glittering symbol of everything Vincent had taken for granted. But in the clear morning light, as we drove toward the foundation offices, I realized I no longer needed that particular symbol of recognition. I had something far more valuable, the calculated calm that had changed everything. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.